What does a bad pattern look like? It's anything that impinges on your safety and your freedom.
That's not love if it does that.
Yes, that's a great place to start.
Welcome back to WhenLoveWorks Dynamically YouTube channel, where we're helping you create and maintain thriving relationships. We're Elitia and Cullen, your favorite relationship coaches with over almost 2 decades of relationship coaching experience. And we are here on today's episode where we're talking about some hidden patterns that may be sabotaging your relationship success without you even realizing it. And at WhenLoveWorks Dynamically, we don't want you to suffer in silence or struggle for love. So today's episode is filled with resources just for you.
Your first time here, subscribe. So it's anything that impinges on your safety and your freedom.
That's not love if it does that.
Yes, that's a great place to start.
The way you recognize a bad pattern is really understanding that you have to be aware of what's happening in your interactions with other people. Now, we all have enough grace to cover our friends, our family, our significant others' bad day.
Right.
But the significant word here is pattern. Multiple bad days is not a bad day. That's a repeated behavior.
Somebody causing harm to you over and over and over again. That's how you got to think of it in that way. If it's changing the composition of your relationship, if it's happening repeatedly. Think about that. And that's what we're saying. So there's plenty of room for grace, but when you extend grace to somebody who's doing this on the regular, now you're weaponizing grace against yourself.
And it's tricky how patterns are formed. They're really subtle. And so we want you to be aware of how they're formed. Most times they're from your childhood experiences, any attachment styles you may have, any past trauma that you haven't processed, or your disappointment, which is really the gap between what you want this relationship to be and what's actually happening. And oftentimes people are in disappointment mode when they're engaging, and they see that often because they're comparing the actuality against the reality that's showing up, and that person may not even know the ideal that you're carrying around. If you are in a connection and the pattern, you're seeing a pattern and you're often disappointed, it's oftentimes because you have an ideal of that relationship, but you haven't communicated it to the other party, so you're walking around in disappointment. For example, there have been people that have been friends for 15, 20 years. I mean, going all the way back to high school, but they'll say things to themselves like, she should know me by now, or why is this happening? But they haven't articulated that to the friend. And so the bad pattern that's happening is the difference of this ideal relationship you have and what your friend is actually displaying. And oftentimes we see that as a very unhealthy connection because it's not articulated. Your ideal and what's actually showing up is that gray area, and that's where a lot of disappointment shows up.
But it's your responsibility to close the gap. That person has no idea what is best practices for you. It's your responsibility to communicate to them that a pattern is forming and that they're causing harm to you on a regular basis. And now your relationship is threatening to be completely composed of bad behavior.
Another way patterns is formed is when you think about it, where in society have we actually learned about love? And so our cultural conditioning about love is just being passed down through generations. And so patterns of bad behavior are formed because we're just sharing the same bad practices from one generation to another.
A common example of cultural things that are passed down is people there are people that we work with that have never been hugged, never been told they love you, stuff like that. These are things that are passed down. That's your norm.
Yeah.
And that's the default you're bringing into relationships. And that can be extremely detrimental, especially if you crave those things. Or even worse, if you go into a relationship and your partner's love language is physical touch. And in your home, nobody ever hugged one another.
Yeah, I remember early on when we were dating, Colin was like, if you call that love, then don't love me. And I had normalized so much dysfunction that I thought that I was expressing love. And Colin was like, actually, no, you're causing more harm in your words and the language and the tone that you're saying it. And just because I had normalized it or heard it in my community growing up, that type of tone and language was negative. And so it was a disconnect. And that societal norm was being passed down through my whole generation. I could tell you my whole lineage. I could tell you the grandparents that I got it from. But it definitely showed up as one of the areas we had to work on because it was a pattern that I wasn't even aware of. Now that we understand what the patterns are and where they might come from, let's talk about the top 3 that might be blocking your relationship success. These are the common ones we see, And over 15 years of doing this work, this is what really shows up in relationships.
So the top 3 patterns. Number 1, bad communication. And a lot of people think that's people that just can't form sentences and they're not articulate. No, that's not it. This is people that are people being fear of vulnerability. And that's so important. I don't care how good your skills are at communicating. If you're showing up as your representative, that's problematic. You're never going to have a genuine connection, and that person is never going to know anything about you that somebody off the street doesn't know about you, know?
And oftentimes in relationships, one partner thinks they are communicating. So it's nonverbals. They're walking around upset and they're not articulating anything. That's the challenge with communication altogether. A lot of people think it actually happened. And
Right.
so the first pattern we often see in relationships is bad communication. Either it's not there, you don't want to share, you don't want to be vulnerable, you don't want to let them know how much you hurt. And so it's an overall just mesh.
Yeah.
It's a mess.
Well, I mean, machismo and
Mhm.
stuff like that will keep a person from actually saying they're a lot of men are more comfortable with being pissed off than telling you
Communicate.
they were been hurt because
Mhm.
because of machismo. And there are other ones too. I don't want to just pick on men. There are tons of things that keep people from actually. There are tons of people that can't even say they're sorry.
Yeah.
So and you just think about how that just how unrealistic that is to think that you're going to go through an entire relationship without making a mistake. That's just so unrealistic.
The
So,
second pattern that often happens in relationship is when people don't have conflict resolution
oh
skills.
yeah,
Conflict will come up, and unfortunately it becomes a pattern because oftentimes people fear the conflict. They don't want us to be on bad terms. They don't want to tell you the harm that you're really causing because, again, you might be a friend of 20 years, you might be a partner that's really their person, you may be a colleague that they really dig, and they just don't want to introduce conflict into that relationship.
and then some people don't want they view conflict in their relationship as their relationship is broken
Yeah.
or it's lesser than. You got to your ego. You can't have your ego has to be removed from this whole experience because conflict will come. I don't care how much compatibility that you go in the relationship with. You and your partner could be thick as thieves, but conflict will come and you have to put it in its right place. It
Yeah.
is an invitation into creativity. It's not there to shame you. It's there to point to the few things that aren't going well in your relationship that need your attention to be solved. Because
Yeah.
most people are transitioning from being single, from being in a relationship with someone else at some stage in that relationship, and then now all conflict is doing is saying you're not single anymore. You need to shore this thing up right here. It's going to keep rearing its head until you fix it.
Yeah. So the second pattern is around those no conflict resolution skills. And oftentimes people just don't stop and learn conflict resolution
Right,
skills.
right.
And the final pattern that really is insidious is dormant companionship. And unfortunately, the first two, bad communication and no conflict resolution skills, equal dormant companionship. So no
Yeah.
matter who you're in a relationship with, if you have this level of entitlement because that's your person, they're just supposed to be there, then you're taking the companionship for granted, for one. And then oftentimes people fall into bad habits because they have been connected to their other human being for 10 years, 5 years, 6 months. They fall into, it's just whatever with them. And so it's a level of companionship where it's taken for granted. And then,
Apathy.
that leads to apathy and
Right,
complacency. Thank you, because that's where
right.
I was going. Like, that's a human being that chose to spend their time and energy with you. Companionship has to be nurtured. But the pattern that we often see people fall into is taking it for granted. So it's just sitting there.
Right.
Now, you might be wondering, I'm watching this video, I see myself in some of the things that they shared. And now that I'm in this bad pattern, I'm in this slump, can I get out of it?
Right.
The good news is, yes, you can, and
Right.
you're at the right place.
Right. It's actually the reason why we got into this work in the first place because yeah, I mean these things can happen and they can happen faster than you think they can. You guys know we do relationship coaching, and we had this one client who they were slipping further and further away into this pattern of not connecting, and and what we noticed was we had to sidebar them and brought them in for coaching. And one of the first things we had to do with them is let them know that your relationship is going to have to be made into a priority, and your job is going to have to get in line behind it. And so, and other.
So will family. So
So
will
exactly.
all the things.
Right. So that and in doing that, that helped tremendously with helping them to get out of there, because their pattern was,
we both busy professionals.
Yep.
We're passing by one another. We might
Right.
live together, but the
Weren't communicating.
communication is strained. The
Yep.
companionship is there, but not. So it's like a foggy area.
And there was nothing being put in the bank. Like if everything that you're doing in your relationship is,
withdrawals and
putting out fires and stuff like that, and you're taking withdrawals out all the time, or it's going to come across that way anyway, then everything is going to be a strain. And that's what happened with them. And so
we gave them 3 basic steps. Number 1, prioritize your relationship. It is your first job. Your actual job in the career world outside of your home is going to have to come after that. Your friends, your family, your connections, they become second to your relationship. So that was the first step. Really shifting mindset around what is priority. The definition of that word means first.
And the second thing we told them is that you're going to have to address that thought process, because if you don't change the thought process, the thoughts affect behavior, and behavior affects habits. So we were like, nah, you got to get in there and address these thoughts. So we had them both do their profile and see and be honest about exactly what they needed from one another without holding any punches.
And this could fall into the cracks, because I remember when I was working on the other side of education and, trying to just doing all the things, being in leadership, working with adults, working with families, working with young people. And I was so out of balance. And it would turn into 2 weeks and 3 weeks where I hadn't gone on a date with my husband, probably hadn't spent time with the children. And it was blatant, but I just was in a loop that all these things got to get done. And my family was like, hello, we live together. Hi, can we see you? And I had to shift my mindset that this relationship is the priority. If I really believe that, then it helped me make the flip. Because before that, I was just in the weeds. And oftentimes when you're in it, you don't see that you're out of balance.
Also, we highly recommend that you have where you come together once a month. People have date nights. We're talking about having a State of the Union where you actually come together once a month. And it doesn't have to be that grandiose name like that.
That's what we call out. We call out the state of the relationship. And we have them just about every month. But you could get creative with it. Do it as you walk on the park. You could create a space in your house where that's the love hub. And you all have the state of the relationship conversation there. That's the check-in.
The important thing is that you meet once a month.
Minimum.
Where it's not, where you're not meeting for an argument.
Yeah.
Because if you come there, then you can come in and ask for support. And then your partner can ask for support. Or you can or if you're the person that's the leader with this thing, go in and ask your partner, do they need support?
Yeah.
You need it. And you probably see, you guys are so close. You're going to know. One thing about partners, they're really sensitive to each other, and they can tell when their partner has a need. Ask them. They may not respond the first few times, but continue to ask. How can I support you?
Yeah. How am I doing? How am I landing as a girlfriend, as a boyfriend, as a wife, how am I doing?
Yep.
So those 3 steps will help you get out of the slump. 1, you have to prioritize the relationship. It is important. 2, you're going to have to go in and shift the bad habits, but you have to be very intentional. And that's why we give you the healthy relationship definition, because we're saying be intentional in these 6 areas: with your time, with your energy, with your resources, with your support, with your health, and with your service. Yeah. And then step 3 is you have to have some form of check-in at minimum monthly.
So this was a small peek into what we do. If you need something more comprehensive, you can join our membership.
In our relationship coaching, we work with couples and individuals who really need that self-awareness, that reflection piece, the reprogramming, right? The mindset shifts and all of the belief work that has to happen to have healthy relationships. So in the membership, you're getting that one-on-one coaching. You are checking your energy tracker. You're really seeing how you show up and then what you translate in your relationships. Right. And membership is a great place to do that, because you'll have the accountability partner of coaches like us.
Because blind spots are real, and that's what we're there for.
On top of the membership that Cullen invited you to, there are other ways that you can really support yourself in breaking these patterns, because you're going to have to do some work. Remember, When Love Works Dynamically, work is in the title. So you can surround yourself with examples of healthy couples, especially if you're the person who has normalized it or has societal conditioning. You need to now change your environment to see healthy relationships. 2, you're going to have to check in with yourself and with your partner. Again, a part of our membership helps you do that, but we want you to find your own way to check in with yourself and your partner. And then get that accountability partner. It could be a friend, it could be a therapist. We're coaches, but we really want you to be intentional about connecting with another human being for accountability.
Yeah.
And finally, trust the process.
Yeah.
Healing is going to take time.
That's right. We want to manage expectations and let you know it didn't take you 2 weeks to get where you are. It's not going to take you 2 weeks to get out of it. You have to give it time and just be patient with it.
Give yourself all the grace that you need, because it's okay for you to, what you always say, be bad at it.
Yeah, be bad at something until you get good at it. Give yourself that grace. I know we gave you a lot of information today, but if you want to work with us going forward, a good place to start is this month's Love Leader Lounge. They happen at the first Tuesday of every month, and we would love to see you there.